And welcome back to this video series on Bitcoin. Mining transactions in blocks. New transactions are constantly flowing into the network from user wallets and other applications as they are seen by the network nodes. They get added to a temporary pool of unverified transactions maintained by each node. As miners construct a new block, they add unverified transactions from this pool to the new block and then attempt to prove the validity of that new block with the mining algorithm proof of work. Transactions are added to the new block prioritized by the highest fee transactions first and a few other criteria. Each miner starts the process of mining a new block of transactions as soon as he receives the previous block from the network. Knowing he has lost that previous round of competition, he immediately creates a new block, fills it with new transactions and the fingerprint of the previous block and starts calculating proof of work for the new block. Each miner includes a special transaction in his block, one that pays his own Bitcoin address to the reward. Currently 12.5 newly created Bitcoin plus the sum of transaction fees from all the transactions included in the block. If he finds a solution that makes that block valid, he wins this reward because his successful block is added to the global blockchain and the reward transaction he included becomes spendable. Jing, who participates in the mining pool, has set up his own software to create new blocks that assign their reward to a pool address. From there, a share of the reward is distributed to Jing and other miners in proportion to the amount of work they contributed in the last round. Alice's transaction was picked up by the network, included in the pool of unverified transactions. Once validated by the mining software, it was included in the new block called a candidate block, generated by Jing's mining pool. All the miners participating in the mining pool immediately start computing proof of work for the candidate block. Approximately 5 minutes after the transaction was first transmitted by Alice's wallet, one of Jing's ASIC miners found a solution for the candidate block and announced it to the network. Once other miners validated the winning block, they started the race to generate the next block. Jing's winning block became part of the blockchain as block hash 277316, containing 420 transactions, including Alice's transaction. The block containing Alice's transaction is counted as one confirmation of that transaction. Approximately 19 minutes later, a new block hash 277317 is mined by another miner. Because this new block is built on top of block hash 277316 that contained Alice's transaction, it's added even more computation to the block, thereby strengthening the trust in those transactions. Each block mined on top of the one containing the transaction counts as an additional confirmation for Alice's transaction, thereby making it more and more trusted by the network. In the diagram figure 2.9 we see block hash 277316, which contains Alice's transaction. Below it are 277316 blocks, including block hash 0, linked to each other in a chain of blocks, blockchain all the way back to block 0, known as the Genesis block. Over time, as the height of the block increases, so does the computational difficulty of each block and the chain as a whole. The blocks mined after the one that contains Alice's transaction acts as further assurance as they pile on more computation in a longer and longer chain. By convention, any block with more than 6 confirmations is considered irrevocable because it would require an immense amount of computation to validate and recalculate the 6 blocks. So here you see in figure 2.9, Alice's transaction included in block hash 277316. Spending the transaction. Now that Alice's transaction has been embedded in the blockchain as part of a block, it is part of the distributed ledger of Bitcoin and visible to all Bitcoin applicants. Each Bitcoin client can independently verify the transaction and as valid and spendable. Full node clients can track the source of the funds from the moment the Bitcoin were first generated in a block, incrementally from transaction to transaction until they reach Bob's address. Lightweight clients can do what is called simplified payment verification. See payment verification SV notes on page 138. By confirming the transaction is in the blockchain and has several blocks mined after it, thus providing assurance that the miner is accepted as valid. Bob can now spend the output from this on other transactions. For example, Bob can pay a contractor or supplier by transferring value from Alice's coffee cup payment to these new owners. Most likely, Bob's Bitcoin software will aggregate many small payments into a larger payment, perhaps concentrating all the day's Bitcoin revenue into a single transaction. This would aggregate the various payments into a single output and a single address. For a diagram of an aggregating transaction, see figure 2.6. As Bob spends the payments received from Alice and other customers, he extends the chain of the transaction. Let's assume that Bob pays his web developer Joseph in Bangalore for a new website page. Now the chain of transactions will look like figure 2.10. So you can see here figure 2.10 as a part of the transaction from Joe to GoFetch. In this chapter we saw how transactions build a chain that moves value from owner to owner. We also tracked Alice's transaction from the moment it was created in her wallet through the Bitcoin network and to the miners who recorded it on the blockchain. In the rest of this book we will examine the specific technologies behind wallets, addresses, signatures, transactions by network, and finally mining. Cryptography. Ownership of Bitcoin is established through digital keys, Bitcoin addresses, and digital signatures. The digital keys are not actually stored in the network but are instead created and stored by users in a file or a simple database called a wallet. The digital keys in a user's wallet are completely independent of the Bitcoin protocol and can be generated and managed by the user's wallet software without reference to the blockchain or access to the internet. Keys enable many of the interesting properties of Bitcoin, including decentralized trust and control, ownership and attestation, and cryptography proof security model. Most Bitcoin transactions require a valid digital signature to be included in the blockchain, which can only be generated with a secret key. Therefore, anyone with a copy of that key has control of the Bitcoin. The digital signature used to spend funds is also referred to as a witness, as term used in cryptography. The witness data in a Bitcoin transaction testifies to the true ownership of the funds being spent. Keys come in pairs consisting of a private secret key and a public key. Think of a public key as similar to a bank account number and a private key as similar to a secret PIN or signature on a check that provides control over the account. These digital keys are very rarely seen by users of Bitcoin. For the most part, they are stored inside the wallet file and managed by the Bitcoin wallet software. In the payment portion of a Bitcoin transaction, the recipient's public key is represented by its digital fingerprint called a Bitcoin address, which is used in the same way as a beneficiary name on a check, pay to the order of. In most cases, a Bitcoin address is generated from and corresponds to a public key. However, not all Bitcoin addresses represent public keys. They can also represent other beneficiaries such as scripts, as we will see later in this chapter. This way, Bitcoin addresses abstract the recipient of funds, making transaction destinations flexible, similar to paper checks, a single payment instrument that can be used to pay into people's accounts, pay into company accounts, pay for bills, and pay to cash. The Bitcoin address is the only representation of the keys that users will routinely see, because this is the part they need to share with the world. Public key cryptography and cryptocurrency. Public key cryptography was invented in the 1970s and is a mathematical foundation for computer and information security. Since the invention of public key cryptography, several suitable mathematical functions such as prime number explanation and elliptic curve multiplication have been discovered. These mathematical functions are practically irreversible, meaning that they are easy to calculate in one direction and infeasible to calculate in the opposite direction. Based on these mathematical functions, cryptography enables the creation of digital, secret, and unforgettable digital signatures. Bitcoin uses elliptic curve multiplication as the basis for its cryptography. In Bitcoin, we use public key cryptography to create a key pair that controls access to Bitcoin. The key pair consists of a private key derived from its unique public key. The public key is used to receive funds, and the private key is used to sign a transaction to spend the funds. There is a mathematical relationship between the public and the private key that allows a private key to be used to generate signatures on messages. This signature can be validated against the public key without revealing the private key. When spending Bitcoin, the current Bitcoin owner presents her public key and a signature different each time, but created from the same private key in a transaction to spend those Bitcoin. Through the presentation of the public key and signature, everyone in the Bitcoin network can verify and accept the transaction as valid, confirming that one person transferring Bitcoin owned them at the time of the transfer. Public and private keys. A Bitcoin wallet contains a collection of key pairs, each consisting of a private key and a public key. The private key is a number usually picked at random. From the private key, we use elliptic curve multiplication, a one-way cryptographic function to generate a public key. From the public key, we use a one-way cryptographic hash function to generate a Bitcoin address. In this section, we will start with the generating the private key. Look at the elliptic curve math that is used to turn that into a public key, and finally generate a Bitcoin address from the public key. The relationship between private key and public key and Bitcoin address is shown in figure 4.1. Private keys. A private key is simply a number picked at random. Ownership and control over the private key is the root of user control over all funds associated with the corresponding Bitcoin address. The private key is used to create signatures that are required to spend Bitcoin by providing ownership of funds used in a transaction. The private key must remain secret at all times because revealing it to third parties is equivalent to giving them control over the Bitcoin secured by that key. The private key must also be backed up and protected from accidental loss, because if it's lost it cannot be recovered and the funds secured by it are forever lost too. So I'm going to leave it here today for this video. If you like listening, please give me a thumbs up, like, share and subscribe. Thank you.